Good morning to you. Appreciate Brother Corey and having the faith in me that I will preach what's right. He won't have to jump onto me after I get done. I appreciate you folks. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, we'll use that to begin with. Enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. Because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. We've heard many a sermon on those two verses, but I want to look at how many is a few. Few, to begin with, is how many days that we have to make the best of our lives. And more importantly than that, few is how many days we have to prepare for the next life. Very few. That question has been asked many a time. How many is few? And I hope that we can get some good out of that this morning. Job said, man that is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. He cometh forth like a flower and is cut down. He fleeth also as a shadow and continueth not. Job chapter 14, verses 1 and 2. In the New Testament, Brother James, he says, whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanishes away. James chapter 4, verse 14. You know, we've all seen that pan of water, that tea kettle sitting on the stove, and it puts out that little bit of steam. Don't get very high before it's gone. That's the way our life is. It don't last very long. You know, I'm 68 years old, nearly 69. It only seems like a few days ago that I was 10 years old. I know a lot of you folks may feel the same way. You know, the psalmist says the days of our years are 70 and 10. That's 70 years. And if by reason of strength they be 80 years, yet is their strength and labor and sorrow. For it is soon cut off and will fly away. Psalms chapter 90, verse 10. Now Peter, he kind of echoed what Job said just a little bit in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 24. He said, for all the flesh is as grass, and all the glory of man as a flower of grass. The grass withereth, and the flower thereof fadeth away. You know, it's really amazing that when you're younger, and I remember it well, you think you want to be a little older. Well, I can't wait till I'm 16 years old. I'll get them driver's license. That's a long time ago, folks. But the older folks, a lot of them seem to want to go get a little younger. Wouldn't be bad to be a little younger. How many times have you ever heard anybody say, boy, I wished I could go back, knowing what I know now, and do it all over again? I don't want to go back, folks. One time's enough. Or how many times maybe you might have said yourself, boy, I wish I could go back being a kid again. You know, innocence is a blessing. Innocence is a blessing. It seems that when you're a kid, when you're real young, you don't have a worry in the world. You don't have those trials and tribulations that so many people have as they get older. When you're young, you don't seem to have to carry the burdens that people have to carry. It almost seems like they don't have a worry in the world. But when you really think about it, the longest life of anybody that's ever lived is really short compared to eternity. How old was Methuselah? 900 and some odd years, nearly 1,000 years old. Folks, he's gone. He's been gone for a long time. You think he thinks he lived a long life now? We live 70, 80, 90, maybe. Methuselah was nearly 1,000 years old. But he's gone. Just like we will be. Compared to eternity, life is short. Life is short to what it might have been if mankind had never sinned. But we did. Can't go back and do that over either. We've all sinned, come short of the glory of God. Romans chapter 3, verse 23. There's not one person on the face of this earth that is accountable that has not transgressed the law. Many people say there is no law, that we're under grace. Well, the Bible tells us that we're under law. So they're calling God a liar when they say we're not under law. I don't want to be one of those calling God a liar. Whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law, for sin is transgression of the law, 1 John 3 and 4. Therefore, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, it is sin. James chapter 4, verse 17. Some of you may have known Brother Bill Treat. I knew Brother Bill well. We talked a whole lot. He told me one time, he said, "Sid, I'm not worried about facing God at judgment for the things that I've done." I said, "What do you mean, Brother Bill?" He said, "I'm going to have to worry about the things that I ain't done." I said, I understand. James chapter 4, verse 17. For him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, it's sin. For whatever is not of faith is sin. Romans chapter 14, verse 23. Now that faith there, in that context, is an individual's conviction. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. Romans chapter 6, verse 23. The soul that sinneth dies. Ezekiel chapter 18. You see, it didn't say the person that dies. It says the soul that sinneth dies. That soul's going to die. Folks, we all have a responsibility. We have to draw a line and we have to make a choice. The fact is that the old clock, or the old hands on the clock, are not going to stop like they did for old Joshua back in Joshua chapter 10, verse 12. You know, time actually stopped for him. It's not going to do that for us. And folks, it's not going to go back like it did for old Hezekiah in 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 11. God allowed him more time. He stopped that little sundial, run it back a little bit. The hour, the days, they get away from us real fast. Me and my wife talk about that every once in a while. We're getting on up there in years, and it just seems like we get up on Monday morning, and next morning we get up to get ready to go back to worship service. I wonder if old Methuselah, me run into some of his buddies, he said, Y'all remember when we done so-and-so a couple hundred years ago? The guy say a couple hundred, that's 500 years ago, Methuselah. What are you talking about now? You know, we say, oh man, I hadn't seen you in a couple of years. Oh, it's been 5 years, man. Well, Methuselah lived all that time and he's gone. We don't have near the time Methuselah did. And some of the others, Noah knows they lived a long time. And then God changed it. But knowing that time is getting away from us, in order to make us understand that it's necessary that we do what God's Word tells us to do, and that's to number the days. We have to number our days. In Psalms chapter 90, verse 12, it says, "So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom." We also need to do what the Bible tells us to do, and we need to redeem our time. Redeem means to make good use of it, or make up for lost time, if you will. Paul said, "See then that you walk circumspectly." Circumspectly means real cautious like. Not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Wherefore you are not unwise, but understanding what the will of the Father is, the Lord is. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15, 16, and 17. We need to set the proper priorities for the very few days that we have left on this earth. And we need to press on toward the future, like Paul said, and don't think about the past no more, because it's gone. Like I said, Hezekiah got it moved back a little for him. It's not going to move back. We can't have no do-overs anymore. I believe Jesus said in Luke chapter 9, verse 62, it may be a little out of context, but you get where I'm coming from. "No man having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom." When we obey the gospel, we need to keep going. We only have a few days. We need to do what God tells us to do. How many are few? Few is how many that's going to be saved. We read Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. "Enter ye into the straight gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction. And many there be which go in thereat, because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it." Now that straight means narrow. It's not straight, it's narrow. Hard to get through. You know, it's interesting that as we study the Bible, that all throughout the Bible, the minority or the few are the ones that's always saved. In 1 Peter 3:20, we read about the 8 souls that were saved. Out of the vast majority of the world that was living at the time, only 8 souls were saved. Who was that? Noah and his family. Noah and his family. In Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 8, we see that men begin to multiply on the earth. Then we go on down to Genesis chapter 7, verses 11 through 23. It tells us about the flood, how the flood came. And everyone died, according to verse 23, except Noah and his family, his 3 sons, his wife, and their wives. We go to chapter 19 of Genesis that we studied not long ago, about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. How many people were saved out of the city? Well, there was actually 4 that was saved out of the city. But how many was actually saved? Lot and his 2 girls. You know, we think Lot's wife was silly for looking back. How many times do we ever hear a big bang or see a big light shining from behind us that we don't turn around and look at it? I mean, if we hear something, we're going to turn and look. Ain't no telling what she heard or what she could get glimpses of from over her head. Can't blame her too much for looking back, but she was told not to, and she misplaced her faith. We read the pitiful story in Genesis chapter 18 of Abraham, how he tried to bargain with God, trying to find just 10 righteous souls in those cities, and couldn't even find 10. Only Lot and his daughters escaped. 4 left out. Lot's wife looked back. She was turned to a pillar of salt. Luke chapter 17, verse 32, Jesus said, remember Lot's wife. She had no more time to make anything right after that. The Hebrew people, out of all the millions, I don't know how many there wasn't there. I thought about asking Sarge, but he wasn't here. He's not here today, but I think he was there. He says he's an old man. I asked him one day if he was on the ark, and he said, no, I wasn't there when Noah built the ark. I said, well, how did you survive? How come you didn't drown? I hope Sarge is doing good today. You know, only those that were 20 years old and under came out of that that wilderness wandering. The prophets of old, they tell us that only a remnant would be saved amidst the judgment of God. And folks, only the faithful returned from the Babylonian and the Assyrian captivities. I don't know how many that was, but it was few compared. Jesus gives us a clue on why there's going to be few saved in these verses that we read in Matthew chapter 7, verse 13 and 14. He said that many is going to go in a broad gate. How come? Well, it's a lot easier to find. People seem to enjoy the things of this world. And they don't look for that narrow gate. Only a few do. And a few is going to find the narrow gate. And you know, even after a few finds that narrow way, they're going to still, some of them going to linger outside. They're not going to go through that gate. Sometimes we misplace our faith. We get off of that straight and narrow way. The lure of the world seems to overtake many good people. Why should I do that when I've got this? You know, you've got a bunch of old cows and horses standing out here in knee-deep coastal Bermuda. Why should I go over there in that old dry ground when I've got all this over here? That's the way people think. We have all this stuff over here. Why do I want to give it up to live this way? A lot of things you have to give up to live on that straight path. But I'll tell you what, you gain a whole lot more than you give up. A whole lot more. People get so wrapped up in the so-called pursuit of happiness that they call the American dream. They go after money, no matter what it takes. whether they have to cheat somebody or whatever. They buy land, they buy houses, property. They think they're accumulating all this stuff. And they think the winner has more stuff than the other people do. So they've won. Satan takes the word out of their heart, folks. He blinds them and he deceives them. In 1 John 2:15 through 17, it says, "Love not the world, neither the things are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passeth away, and the lust thereof. But he that doeth the will of the God abideth forever." No matter what you give up on this earth, all this stuff's going to pass away. But he that doeth the will of the Father abideth forever. James 4, verse 4. "Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God." Y'all know what enmity means? I'm not educated. I should have told visitors that if y'all happen to be English teachers, I'm every English teacher's nightmare. But I usually do. Enmity is pure hatred. Pure hatred. God hates it. Whoso therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. It's just that simple. How many is few? Few is how many laborers there are to gather the harvest of God. And why is that? Why are there so few? Well, in Jesus' day, there was only the scribes and the Pharisees that were trained to, you might say, to reap. But they didn't really care. They was corrupt. They were sinful. All they cared about was what they had. They cared about their position in their life. Now, in our day, we have few that are willing to teach. Few willing to teach, few willing to work. People are more concerned about their stuff, as I call it, their material wealth. Brother Virgil Marshall, some of you may have known, talked to a man that bought a big farm one time. Had a big farm. I don't know if the man ever obeyed the gospel before he had that farm, but Brother Morrison talked to him, tried to get him to obey the gospel or make his life right, because he wasn't doing what he's supposed to be doing. And he said, when I get this land and stuff paid for and get on good footings here, get a hold, he said, I think I will do that. He never did. He never did. He didn't know he only had a few days. He never did make it right with God. You know, it's been said, and I don't know if it's correct or not, but it's been said that 10 to 15% of the Lord's church does 100% of the work of the church. You know, that leaves 85 to 90% in a bad way. Brother Corey brought us a couple of lessons from James chapter 2. And in that book it says, faith without works is dead. So these people, these 85 to 90%, say they have faith in God, but they have no works. So guess what? Faith without works is dead. That puts them in bad shape. And I'm not not saying that the 10 to 15% that's doing the work in the church is going to be all right with God either. That's up to God to decide. Jesus on that last day. Many people in this life nowadays are comfortable in the position that they're in. They get in a rut and they stay there. They like being on the sidelines. Let somebody else do it. One old guy had a lesson one time, let somebody else do it. Well, it come time somebody else died and there wasn't nobody left to do it. So somebody else died. Some people don't want to get down in a ditch and dig. You know, that's the only way the ditch is going to get done. The only way we're going to spread the gospel is to go out, get out and do it. He's left that up to the earthen vessels. That's us. We're supposed to do it. Brother Corey mentioned 50 years. It's good if a man can live 50 years for the Lord. But it says, be thou faithful, even if it means your death, in Revelations 2:10, or be thou faithful until you die. Either way. Just because you've been there for 50 years don't mean you know nothing. I went to services with a man one time, and he bragged about sitting in the same spot, in the same seat, in the same congregation for 50 years. He said, I've been there for 50 years. I asked him a simple question one time in Bible class. You know, I never ask anybody a question that to embarrass them if they don't know the answer to it, you know. But I thought my little granddaughter could have answered that question. And he said, well, it says what it means and it means what it says. He didn't know the answer to it, folks. He sat in the same spot for 50 years and didn't know the answer to that question. We need to be praying that we have an opportunity to train reapers. That's workers. We need to be praying that there's going to be an abundance of workers in the Lord's kingdom, in His church. We need to be praying that God will motivate the lukewarm so they'll get back to work. That's one of the things He had against one of the churches in Asia. You're lukewarm. You're lukewarm. We need to be praying that God will open up our hearts and our finances on behalf. I'm not getting into none of this televangelist stuff, all I want is your money. But we need to give as we have prospered. Because the work of the church has to go on. And it takes money. We need to pray just like it all depends on God. You know why? Because it does. It does. Then we need to work like it depends on us. You know why? Because it does. It depends on us. We can sit down and let time pass, or we can get up and move. That's the only way things gets done. You know, I could go to shake Brother Corey's hand. I could stick my hand out here all day long, and he could stick his hand out. But until one of us gets up and moves, it ain't gonna get done. We need to be praying that ourselves, that God will use us in any capacity that will benefit the Lord's church. We need to pray for these things every day. How many is few? Few is how many God could use to make many more. Matthew chapter 15, verse 34. Jesus used 7 little loaves and 2 little fishes. And he fed 4,000 people. Now, how did he do that? You notice, first of all, he took those things and he gave thanks for those little things. And then what did he do with them? He gave them to other people. He gave them to others. That is what is required for God to make more out of what we do, out of what we have. Jesus took a little bit and made a lot. We can take a little bit that we have and we can make a lot. Just takes a little trying. And people say, well, I ain't got a whole lot. Well, don't take a whole lot. You know, my mother, she could go to the grocery store with $1 and come back with $100 worth of groceries. I don't know where she got that. And she didn't shoplift, but now that woman could make the most out of everything she had. And you know why? As I grew older, I understood exactly how she could take a little bit and make a lot. Because in Luke chapter 6, verse 38, it says, "Give, and it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down and shaken together and running over. Shall men give unto your bosom, for with the same measure that you mete, withal it shall be measured to you again." My mother was a Christian woman. She used everything she had, and yeah, I'm bragging, she used everything she had in service to God. Now it says, pressed down and shaken together. And always when I hear about the fields are white already for harvest, I think about the old cotton picking. And when I think about being pressed down and shaken together, I think about dragging that cotton sack out in that field. And it might come up to the throat of that sack, but what do? To get more in that sack, you pick it up, you shake it, you take that foot, you stick it down in there, and you press it down in there. That sack will hold a whole lot more than you think it will. God's going to give to us in good measure, pressed down and shaken together. Not just pour that flour in a jar and it's filled up. You pat that jar down on the table just a little bit and that flour sinks. Then God's going to fill it up again. He's going to fill it full. Pressed down. There's no reason in this world to doubt. You know, because God is the Lord of the harvest. He's able to send out reapers. And this is the confidence that we have in Him, that if we ask anything according to His will, He hears us. 1 John 5:14. We must, and must is absolute. There's no getting out of it. We must be thankful for what we got. And we must be willing to give what we have in order to benefit the church. Whether it be our time, our talents, our money, we must be willing to give it in order to help the church and expand the boundaries of His kingdom in this world. Barnabas gave freely. In Acts chapter 4, verse 32 and 37, it says, "And the multitude of them that believed were of one heart and one soul. Neither said any of them that all of the things which he possessed was his own, but they had all things common. And with great power gave the apostles witness of the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. Neither was there any among them that lacked. For as many as were possessors of the land and houses sold them, brought the prices of the things that were sold, and laid them down at the apostles' feet. I'm not talking about communism here, folks. I'm talking about what they did, so that everybody could have, every man according to as he had need. And Joses, who by the apostles was surnamed Barnabas, which is being interpreted the son of consolation, a Levite, and the country of Cyprus, having land, sold it, and brought the money, and laid it at the apostles' feet. They give what they had. They done what they could so that no one would have to do without. And I've said it many a time. There's no reason in this world why a child of God are to do without. People have more than they need. They have enough to share with everybody, with other people. And we see in Acts chapter 5 the story about Ananias and Sapphira. You know, what they owned was theirs. They didn't have to give it to nobody. But when they was asked how much they got, they said, yeah, that's how much we got out of it. They lied. They just merely lied. Both of them did. That was their downfall. It wasn't in keeping part of what they already had, which was theirs. They just merely lied about it. Fuse how many's going to be saved if we refuse to spread the gospel. Few is how many souls will be reached if we refuse to use our talents for the cause of Christ. Folks, I am really proud to be here at the Church of Pangbrook with this congregation. I am proud for the work that's going on here at the church in Pangbrook. You know, there's many people that hadn't heard the gospel has heard the gospel now because of the church at Pangbrook. Brother Corey broadcasts on the internet. Some people that's not heard the truth in a long time has heard the truth now because it's being taught from the church at Pangbrook. Many people hadn't heard the truth because wherever they go likes to water it down and soften it up. And they sidestep the truth because they don't hurt nobody's feelings. Well, if we say that, they're going to go somewhere else. Well, many people that hear Brother Corey's messages, many people that hear about the Church of Christ at Pangbrook have never heard the gospel. They didn't know how to be saved. But folks, they do now. The ones that's heard it, they do now. And everyone around not only White County, but also out of this country, in other states, know now, because of the work that's being done here, because of the videos that's been made and the truth that's been taught, they know that the Lord's church in Pangbrook, Arkansas has never been closed, and we're open and ready for business. We're alive and we're active. But folks, here comes the kicker. The church as a whole is doing great. But the church as a whole is not going to stand before the judge on the last day. But each one of us are going to. Each one of us. And we're going to have to give an account for what we've done. So the few days that we have left on this earth, We need to do like Jesus said and go about doing the Father's business. The fields are white, all ready for harvest. John chapter 4, verse 35. Matthew 9, 37, 38. The harvest is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest that he will send forth laborers into his harvest. Our days are few, and our days are numbered. The saying is, life is short, death is sure, sin's the cause, and Christ is the cure. God gave us the most wonderful gift that anybody could ever receive, and that was his Son, Jesus Christ. And I might say his only begotten Son, that you and I might have an eternal home in heaven. And we won't have to worry about a few days anymore if we just do what he says. Hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized, and live a faithful life. That's how you get started. If there's anyone here that needs to obey the gospel, whatever their need is, we ask you to come as we stand and sing the songs.
There is a habitation built by the